al nostre mestre de cerimònies, Jordi.
Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to our live streaming of the presentation of Johan Cruyff 14, the newly launched autobiography of the great Dutch footballer. On the screen there you can see Jordi Cruyff, Johan's son. The event being presented here from the Auditori 1899, which is on the Camp Nou premises. And our host for the day is Bernard Soler of TV3. Introducing the president of FC Barcelona, Josep Maria Bartomeu. Good day. Bit of a problem with his microphone.
Bon dia a tothom.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to this event. It's just over 6 months since the death of Johan. This autobiography being presented today on the club grounds is something that we are very excited about and shows what this player means to the club and what he will mean for the rest of history. I'd like to welcome Johan's family to the auditorium and thanking them for all the work that they have put in through difficult times, and also Planeta Columna, the publishers of the book, and for the work they've gone to produce an autobiography of such an important player for this club. Because surely, if he hadn't been here, the club would not be the same as it is today. Johan Cruyff is somebody who always helped and collaborated with our club, with his spontaneity, his philosophy of life. And it's thanks to him that we are able to continue with this project, and this book is one which I recommend that you all read because it gives personal insight into the man and his dedication, his ideas, particularly about innovation in sport. It's something that a lot of people are going to enjoy. And it shows how here at the club we also have so many projects that are going on here, which Johan Cruyff is involved in, FCB Coneixement, FCB Knowledge, that is, also the Universitas product.
Johan Cruyff a través del seu institut.
And Johan Cruyff through his own institute, of course, his legacy lives on. The alliance between the club and that institute is a winning project. There's a master's that's just been set up. So everything that Johan Cruyff contributed to the world of football is being continued here at the club. So we're very proud that the publishers are here to present a book that I think that everybody who wants to know about the world of sport, this is compulsory reading. Just spotting some of Cruyff's own students that are here in the venue, and talking about how the values created by Cruyff are being transmitted to the youngsters in the academy. And thank you to all of you.
Gràcies, president. Aquest és un acte esportiu, social.
Thanking the president, talking about this as a sporting and social event, but also a literature event to present a book that analyzes Cruyff's philosophy, one of the most important players, not just at Barca, but for football history and sport history in general. An interesting statistic coming up.
Deixem, doncs, que parlin les persones que en saben de llibres. En aquest cas...
So we're going to hand over to people that know about books, and this is Gloria Gasc from the publisher itself, from Planeta. Thank you for those words, and she'd like to thank the club, the foundation, and Johan's family, Jordi in particular, for what they've done to promote such a special book for us. The aim of any publisher is to find stories and get them out to the general public. This is a non-fictional book, so it's a book that wants to contribute values and ideas to society and try to make it a little bit better. So when this idea came up about a year ago, the first autobiography of Johan, it's something we didn't think twice about. This was a dream of all of us to know more about the life of the most influential man in football history. And then last March, the icon became a legend. The book you have in your hands, which I hope you're all going to read, is the most complete that's ever been written about Johan Cruyff and his legacy and influence that we're sure will explains the last 50 years of history of this club, as Pep Guardiola said the other day in London. Johan is everybody's person. The book came out last week and is already the number one book, both in Catalan and in Spanish, so obviously we're very happy with the reception for the book. So that's the statistic that we were promised. It's the number one book. So now, hello, Jordi, how are you? So there you go, number one book in just 4 or 5 days. Did you expect that? Well, I don't know anything about books, but I'm certainly very excited that the book has been so well received. You've read it, obviously. Of course, nobody knows your father better than yourself. Was there anything that surprised you in this book, where you thought, oh, I never knew that? Yeah, I think about the World Cup 1978, which he did not go to, is much better detailed in the book than perhaps we ever spoke about at home. He never really spoke about that episode. And he's often had to apologize for not going to the World Cup, and the book really explains well why he didn't. Also about his time in the United States. I didn't realize how much his philosophy changed by his time in the US. So many things that he initiated actually started in the US. I didn't know that. Well, don't explain everything because we want people to read the book. But there's one anecdote we'd like to mention early in the book, your own birth, and how that had an influence on the 5-0 win at the Bernabeu in 1974. Yeah, born by a cesarean. I wouldn't come out when they wanted me to. So becoming a father, obviously the most important thing in the world. And that was followed by a 5-0 win at the Bernabeu. Yeah, that kind of made that story so much nicer because Caesareans happen. But I was born precisely on that day, and I decided that I wasn't going to allow myself to be born on the day of that game. It's quite interesting. Yeah, we've learned so many secrets about Cruyff, his time in Ajax as well, in Holland, before coming to Barca. Perhaps of the last few months that's had most impact on you is how people have just come up to you in the street, and you've learned how much your father meant to people. Yeah, every week people see you, generally from my father's generation, and they feel the need, they want to say things, but perhaps they get nervous, and all they can do is give me a heartfelt hug. Sometimes they'll even let a tear loose, and that shows how much my father meant to so many people as a player, as a coach, as a person. He was a man who would always voice his opinion, who stood by his principles, and a very emotional person too. I think that shows in this book as well, and I'm very proud to see what he meant, not just to our family as father, husband, grandfather, but to everybody. How could you explain to young people what Johan Cruyff meant? Young people associate him more with his period as a manager at high-profile teams, Ajax and Barca, becoming very much a legend. Particularly me as someone who was a player as well, it gives me so much more respect for what he did in his life. We knew that there would be a huge reaction to his death. Perhaps we didn't expect it to be quite so big. We're surprised by the impact, and that makes us even prouder than ever. The book shows how Cruyff was someone always thinking, all day, different thoughts. Numbers, how he was always counting numbers, and yeah, he was a numerologist. He was always thinking, always busy, never rested, always had ideas about little things, thinking that it would be better to drive, and sometimes driving an unusual route, because he'd worked out how the different traffic lights combined with each other, and he knew the quicker way. He'd always think about these little details, and in football he was the same, always picking out little details that had an effect on the result. That shows his personality and how he adapted that to football. Was there anything that perhaps he didn't do in football? Well, he was never Holland's international manager at a World Cup or a European Championship. Came very close, but the agreement didn't come through. He explains that in the book, why that never came about. It's something of a mystery for Dutch people that he was never the manager. And I think that's something perhaps he would like to have done in his life. I think you could say he did everything he wanted, all his dreams came true, but that was the one thing that was missing. He was the Catalan national manager for a few games. Okay, we're now going to give a chance for some of the people in the house to ask questions. I don't think there's any doubt about the legend of Johan Cruyff.
L'Ajax és casa seva.
in Holland as well, in Ajax as well.
Però et vull preguntar pel Barça.
But I'd rather focus today on Barca and what did Barca mean to Johan.
Bueno, yo creo que incluso la razón por firmar aquí.
Well, I think the reason he came to this club at a difficult time in the 1970s shows he was someone who never took the easy option. He was always different to other people, but it was a great decision to come here. He shows how Ajax looked after him from the age of 13, turning him into the person he became. But I think Barcelona is very much at the same level as Ajax in importance for his life. He came here as a player, but he was also a manager. He was here for such a huge share of his life. His last day, he was still here in Barcelona, which shows how much he loved this city and this club. He's left a legacy that we can see. Jordi, we're going to hand over now to the press. Oh, sorry. First, I'd like to thank, first of all, everybody from the media who's come today, my family, my friends, and also FC Barcelona, who've let us use their facilities, and of course my mother and my family. Thank you. I am very grateful that we're able to launch the book here today. Okay, so the floor is open to the media to ask questions.
Jordi Sunyer de TV3.
Hello, Jordi.
Què és el que menys li agradava del futbol
What
del teu pare?
did your father least like about football?
No me acuerdo de haberlo leído en el libro.
I don't think I read that in the book.
A mi padre le gustaba el
My father
fútbol de ataque.
liked attacking football.
Más le costaba.
What he found most
Supongo
difficult,
el libro eso sí lo explica.
and he does explain this in the book,
Consideraba que las decisiones de fútbol se tenía que tomar por
that
gente especialista en el fútbol.
decisions in football had to be made by specialists in the game, and he tended to have arguments with directors, for example. He explains this very well, particularly in America, where he understood how a club should be made to run better.
Hola, Jordi. Edgar Fornós de RAC1. Recordo que fa poc aquí a la sala de premsa del Camp Nou vas dir que el Johan és una mica de tots.
Johan Cruyff
de tenir-lo a casa.
was everybody, but you lived with him as well. So having the master living at home, how did that affect you, perhaps as a footballer and as a son?
Yo creo que Johan Cruyff para el
Johan Cruyff
9,9% es una persona que conocen a través
is
del
someone
deporte, a
people
través de sus actividades.
really know through sport and his activities, but for the family and friends, in my case, he was my father. One of the things I most admired was his capacity when he came home to switch off from football and act as a father or a husband or a grandfather. I admire that because I always used to bring my work home, but he had an extraordinary capacity for, as soon as he turned the keys in the door, his work ended, and he was a father. I learned so much from him, like any son. I admire my father. But when, on days like this, I see the legacy that he left, then that love is even stronger.
Hola Jordi, Elena Condis, Cadena COPE. ¿Por qué tenía tantas disputas, tanto rifirrafes?
Why so many arguments with directors?
Bueno, yo creo que él pensaba que que muchas decisiones
Well,
se
he
tomaban,
thought that a lot of
las tenían que
decisions
tomar
that directors
personas que
made
ya estaban
were
involucrados en
decisions
el día a
that
día
should have
del
been made
deporte.
by people involved in the
Porque
sporting
realmente el
day-to-day of the
vestuario
club.
es un sitio que poca
Because
gente conoce, la
few
presión que
people
conlleva,
know the
el estrés,
indoors of the
y
locker
cuando
room,
has estado ahí, estás
and when you've
preparado
been
para
there,
todo,
then you're ready to
él
deal
simplemente
with
pensaba
these
así,
things.
que
And he always
también
thought
la
that
directiva, todos tenían que entender
that the
que lo más
directors
importante
had
en un
to
club de
understand
fútbol
that
es
the
el
most
equipo de
important
fútbol,
figure
y no
in the
todos los
club is the
sitios. Yo creo
football
que lo
team.
explica, sobre
I
todo,
think he explains
mucho más
that
con el
well
Ajax,
in the book,
que el Ajax ahora
especially
mismo es,
speaking about
un club que está en
Ajax,
bolsa,
which
y
is
hay
now
como
on
3
the
o 4
stock
directivas
exchange
diferentes, y
and has had
tienes que
different
pasar un
directors
proceso tras otro para
and
las
has to
decisiones,
deal with
y eso es
certain
algo que él
decision-making
nunca
processes,
entendió,
which is something he
que
never
cada decisión, pues,
understood.
tenía demora y pasaba
Because decisions
por,
then took
por
a long
filtros que no
time,
sabían de fútbol,
had to
y
be
eso era una de las
filtered
cosas que más le
through
molestaba.
people that didn't know enough about football. He didn't like that.
En directo para Radio Marca, primero de todo enhorabuena, no solo por el libro, sino por el trabajo que hacéis en la fundación.
Congratulations
con esa
to
integración de
Jordi, not just for the book, but for what the foundation does for disabled people. The book talks about your time as a player at Barca. And the question, the sentence was, if he's ready, he'll play. But what was it like having a manager, your dad being the manager here and your father at home? Yeah, it was a difficult situation when the team won. Then people don't talk about these things, but I remember there was a change of generation going on at the club, a lot of reserve team players breaking through, the results weren't going so well and people started trying to find reasons. For me, on a personal level, when I was, 20, 21, I went to Manchester United and that freed me of that kind of pressure. It was a difficult decision.
No hay que mirar muy lejos para
and you don't have to look too far to understand why that was difficult. There are other managers that have their children, sons playing in the first team, and every time things go wrong, people point at them a lot more. Even worse today with social media, YouTube, that makes the situation even more difficult.
Jordi, Víctor Lozano de Onda Cero, enhorabuena por el libro también. Tu padre, bueno, nadie mejor que tú, como decía Bernat, o tus hermanas o tu madre conocía.
Nobody better than you knew your father. He wasn't perhaps a very expressive, emotional person, but you lived with him. What do you think was the sporting success that made him the happiest? When did you really see him just completely out of his mind with joy?
Era capaz de separar.
Well, like I say, he used to leave his work behind in his private life. So with him, he didn't really let us know if he was happy. Obviously, if he'd won a European Cup as a coach, then obviously he was very happy. But he didn't spend that much time. He'd come home, football, he'd leave and focus on being a father or a grandfather or a husband. He'd disconnect. But I do know one of his greatest pride and joys was the 1974 World Cup. Even though Holland didn't win, he knows that no team was greater remembered from that World Cup than Holland, and that was more important for him than winning the trophy.
Aquí Marc Marvà de la porteria de BTV. Ara fa uns 5-6 mesos gairebé que...
It's 5 or 6 months since Johan left us.
Per la família I si també esteu orgullosos de tot el suport que...
How proud do you feel about the support that's been shown since then? Obviously, incredibly grateful to everybody, very happy and proud. Much bigger reaction than we ever expected in every area. It's been extraordinary, and that just makes us even prouder of who he was. I have to say there have been very difficult times because you never really get time to sit on your sofa and cry because you're not ready for dealing with that kind of grief, the loss of a father. These events, they're difficult in one way, but in another way, they help, and certainly help you realize with pride just how much Johan meant to people. Incredible. If he's up there looking down now, I think he would be very proud. Sometimes you have to die to be loved. In fact, he used to say that himself.
Hola Jordi, Noelia Denis de Babel.com. Decías antes que tu padre no hablaba de fútbol.
You said before your father didn't speak about football at home. But what about the days building up to the first Champions League or European Cup as it was at the time in 1992?
Súper tranquilo.
He was very relaxed, to be honest.
Él siempre pensaba que si preparaba un partido,
he always thought that if you prepared for a game correctly, then you'd done what you had to do, then there wasn't much to get things to work out right on the field, as long as you'd done the right thing in the build-up. As long as he'd said the right words to the players, then that was everything done. On the side of the field, he'd be shouting as any coach did, but also enjoying the game. That was what he was like.
Bueno, primero enhorabuena y me gustaría, Lorea Vaquero del Mundo Deportivo, me gustaría preguntarte, todo el mundo habla de ADN Barça, que era el ADN Barça para tu padre.
Barça DNA and what that meant to your father.
Así un poco por encima.
If we talk about his vocabulary, ball possession, domination, playing the ball from the back, creating pressure up front, and most importantly, making the fans enjoy football. And he felt that was done by playing attacking football, whether playing at home or away. You shouldn't change your tactics. You had to go out and win every game. Those 5 or 6 details were the key to his football vocabulary. Okay, that's the same vocabulary of so many other coaches, but you had to not just say those as cliches, but actually put those into practice on the pitch. Because a lot of managers using the same kind of vocabulary are achieving the same kind of results that he achieved. Would your father be here today? You said you had to die to be loved. Do you think he would be here at the presentation?
No, si él personalmente, en caso de estar vivo, estaría hoy aquí.
Okay, I think Jordi's not too clear what he means by that. Would he have come today? Yes, he would have come today. He'd have been very happy. My father always felt the warmth of the people. In a small village in Greece of just 200 people, somebody would always recognize him and he would always feel their warmth. And that never changed. I think perhaps the most pleasant surprise is to go to London as well, where we presented this book, and seeing the magnitude of the warmth that the people showed to him. The same in Holland, the same here, much more than I perhaps imagined.
En un capítol, el teu pare explica que també un altre somni que...
In your book, your father says he would like to have played in the Premier League. He spoke about the amazing atmosphere at Anfield, and he would like to have played in England, something that you did. Do you think his dream came true through you? Well, maybe in a way, yes. My decision in '96, I think it was, to go to Ajax or to go to United. My decision perhaps was influenced by him, But I also wanted to try English football. Man United had a very young squad at the time, and I knew that was the main reason for going there. But perhaps I knew he'd always dreamt of playing in England, and that might have been a factor. But I know he always had a very special relationship with England. He couldn't play there because of the laws at the time, but he always had a big interest in English football.
Me gustaría saber cómo llevaba tu padre el hecho de que tantos jugadores a los que él había entrenado.
What did your father think about players that he had coached later on have become coaches or associating in some kind of way with running football? But it's perhaps part of his legacy being carried on through new coaches. Was he proud of that? Oh yes, of course, and he paid a lot of attention to those things, very proud. But one thing he really liked was when one of his former players came to visit him, and they'd meet for half an hour and it'd go on for hours talking about football and tactics. My father, when someone came to visit, he always liked asking questions, and if people wanted to ask him questions, he'd always prepare for those meetings. He'd watch games over and over again and take notes. He was always paying a lot of attention to his former players that then became managers. He'd watch their teams, look out for their results, and follow the decisions they'd made. He was really, really proud of doing that.
Al hilo de lo que comentaba el compañero, no sé si tu padre realmente era consciente de lo que supuso para la
historia. Was your father aware of just what he meant? He meant to modern football. Here we know what he achieved with his influence, but did he really understand the extent? I don't know. He certainly stood by his principles to the end, whether or not the results came with that. He was loyal to his philosophy. I suppose he was, because he was always being shown messages of affection. I think when it became known that he had cancer, people showed extraordinary warmth, and he felt that constantly. I'm sure he did, yes.
Molt bé, doncs gràcies companys per les nostres preguntes. Clourem l'acte. Jordi, si et sembla, amb Ángeles Aguilera, ella és la responsable de Planeta, editora de la versió en castellà del llibre, en aquest cas la versió taronja.
Translator of the Spanish version, Ángeles is going to come forth.
Muchísimas gracias.
Well, thank you in name of Planeta, Ángeles Aguilera, for what also has been a tribute to an extraordinary person. Something he says, amongst the many things he says in this book, which oozes football, but also life, and for women ourselves it's very important too, because we see such intimacy in the book of things we can identify with. One thing Cruyff says when speaking about football, football is a game with mistakes. But I also love the numbers, the mathematics, and how that was involved in the team. It was all about winning, but what was also important was having a team. And here in the publishing world, it's mainly words, but also numbers that matter to us. And when we read this book for the first time a year ago, we did the calculations. We realized that this was a book that was a privilege to be able to publish, and we wanted to get to #1, which we have reached as well. But there was a great team behind, so thank you to everybody who helped to publish this book.
Bé, doncs fins aquí aquest acte de presentació.
Okay, thank you for this book presentation of Johan Cruyff 14, the book explaining the legacy of the life and times of Johan Cruyff, as well as his philosophy as well. Okay, we're going to have a photo session first, but before, round of applause for Johan Cruyff.